So here I am at the moment. We're just continuing on with my trip to Dublin here. It's been 2 years since I've been back to Ireland, so I'm just finished an interview with George Hook on News Talk the other day, and I'm just continuing on here with an old friend of mine, investigative journalist Padraig Conlon here at InTallaght Magazine. I've known Padraig for quite a number of years, and he's very interested in geopolitics, international security, and basically radicalisation and all these other factors that's affecting the international security environment and everyday people's lives. So here we are at the magazine in Dublin, InTallaght Dublin. So good to see you again, Padraig.
Good to see you, Noel. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So let's have your questions.
First question, I suppose, like a lot of people in Ireland are getting worried. A lot of other neutral countries, I think like Finland, Sweden and stuff, have been hit with radical Islamic terror incidents in the last few months. How credible will it be? What would you think the odds are on Ireland being hit? Somewhere in Ireland being hit?
I think that's a very interesting question. And when you say about odds, I mean, here's what happens. Most governments look at national security and they look at how they fit into the international security environment. So every year the government would basically put together their budgets for national security defence and basically put the money into where it's needed, sit back and hope for the best. Now that's using what we call a risk analysis, risk methodology for preparation. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get people to see what we call through a threat methodology, looking at threat, and threat migrates. It's binary, it goes up or it goes down, but it's there. So when you look through the risk eyes, you'll see that Ireland is a neutral country, it's a partner of NATO, it's a partner, and internationally it stands as a friendly country, non-offensive, non-colonial, historically. However, when you look through the threat eyes, you see something different. Ireland and Irish people are together collectively a part of the international environment, and we will be attacked if we get attacked, not for Ireland, a happy country, it's for what we represent. We represent Western ideology, and you know, if we look through that eyes, we have to prepare not just nationally here for the potential threat, but the risk to Irish people travelling abroad, because you don't have your nationality imprinted on your skin. It's who you are, and the target is to attack Western ideology, Western philosophy, and Western decadence, as they say, and anything that stands in the way of radicalisation. But I would like to point out this, Padraig, radicalisation, you know, it's something that people don't particularly understand. You know, we'll have to talk about
how does it happen? Exactly?
Well, what happens is before we look at radicalisation, we have to look at fundamentalists.
Sorry, 1 second, I'll close that door.
So before we talk about radicalisation, we need to talk about fundamentalism. You know, if you look at fundamentalism per se, and we speak about this globally, you know, people, whatever religion, people have religion, but are they religious? Do they follow the doctrines and the cornerstones of those religions faithfully? For example, if people believe in, for example, the laws of Jesus Christ and the Bible and Christianity, or the Buddhism, they have their beliefs, their fundamental cornerstones of that faith. But are they extremists? Do they want to take that from the fundamentalist stage and bend other people to your will, either by ideologically, verbally, or in some cases physically, using force to change their ideology? So I think people really need to get their head around this. You're not dealing with a unilateral command structure of an organisation, or per se a section of command, or an ideology where there's an overhead figure. No, that doesn't work like this. You're dealing with emulation. You're dealing with people that have an ideology. But what you've got to remember, that, you know, some people, when you're dealing with radicalisation, how do they get radicalised? It's not just that somebody sits there and goes, you do this, you do that. It's not like that. A lot of this conflict takes place, and a lot of this takes place online. So governments really need to be paying attention to online dialogue and encrypted messaging. And we've seen this time and time again, that people will, terrorist groups and individual lone wolf attackers, they know that they're being watched. In fact, they actually get trained in counter surveillance, how to stop people from surveying you. And they know when they communicate, they become vulnerable, because people communicate in 4 different ways, basically: voice, document, sign, and intuition. So when they use the intuition phase, it's because the team works well together. It's not particularly interceptable, so people try and join into this group. So they know that's the possibility. So they will stay like the individual. They'll be like the salmon swimming amongst the sea of the population and attacking the targets without making contact, because that's where they become vulnerable. So, you know, it's not all contact in the street, it's contact online, and they will keep finding ways around the civil machinery, the police, the intelligence services, and the security services. As we say in our own country here, terrorism will not be defeated by the police. It will not be defeated by the armed force and security. Communities. It's always down to the communities to help defeat. And even the word defeat terrorism is a failing in the state. You will never ever defeat the concept of terrorism. Why? Because terrorism is a phenomenon. It's a concept. It's a philosophy. You can't put your finger onto it and say that's it, because you're fighting an unorthodox methodology. And that's where we have to really get sharper with this. So education, inspiration, although these voices of attack and atrocities and people driving this methodology, we need people like yourself, journalists, that can get their message to the masses, to the people that, people that can't see, feel, and interpret the word for themselves will probably listen to a radical ideology. So we need to challenge that. And that's not the job of the police and the security services. They have a role to play. But this is the job of the constitutionalists, the educationalists, the media. In Islam itself, you've got more Islamic Muslim people dying of the Islamic faith by ISIS than anybody else. And that needs to be brought to the attention as well. So when you work with these people, you give them a voice, they will bring you problems. They will say, I have a problem. We're starting to see more of this. We need to see more of it from the pillars of the Islamic faith coming forward and not feel threatened, because they will bring you this. It's a problem.
For people in Europe, obviously, we've seen November 2015, the attacks in Paris, and since that we've seen Nice, we've seen Germany, Spain, obviously recently Manchester, London. When do you see an end to this coming soon, or how much is it going to get worse, or what do you think is going to happen? What can you see happen in those regards?
Well, as in my role, in what I do around the world, my work is I'm an optimist, but I have to think like a pessimist. As one of my very good old friends would say, a pessimist is a well-informed optimist. I don't see any stop to this for a long time. And if I could even put my finger on it, I would actually probably think you're talking about another generational change, 20 to 25 years.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
These attacks in Europe, it's
going to get worse, because you have, remember, terrorism thrives on liberal democracy. In democracy, we're supposed to be about free to speak, but we're not free to act. Men's is thinking, actors are doing. So when we thought about it, we can speak. People have incitement to hatred, but it's not actually a crime because you're free to speak. But the problem is when you act, it's too late. So again, and this is highly controversial, so again, where is the Human Rights Act brought into this? And it's very important that we do have human rights, but where are the human rights to people that have been murdered? So maybe we have to, again, start looking at the Human Rights Act and where the human rights of people commit these, do they still, and how can we measure this?
You know yourself, the EU are never going to back down, because we actually we have to bow down to EU law, because we're part of the EU, obviously. So can you see them bending as regards and becoming more giving the police more rights for a whole of people? How can they stop it, or can they stop it? What can they do?
There's basically, when you talk about the two elements of this, there's anti-terrorism, which is prevention, counter is response, and usually we have to counter the problem because it's got to the point where there's no other alternative, and we have to use lethal force. Or if we don't use lethal force, use force to deter people from these attacks, which means to take kinetic action. But in the realms of anti-terrorism, there's plenty of opportunities. The laws are one thing, but you can't subjugate your own laws. You can't actually clamp down on your own laws, because remember, this is what terrorists want. They want you to curb your own civil liberties. Exactly. We had in America after 9/11, the Patriot Act. All these acts come into place. Absolutely. And so when people feel their civil liberties are being restricted because of a couple of terrorists, remember, more people die of smoking-related cancer every day than do of terrorist attacks. But it's the car crashes, the infrequency, the punctuation of the now, the unknown. That's what really terrifies. So when you think about it, the number of attacks, you're more likely to die of cigarette cancer. But it's the sharpness, it's the punctuation, it's the now, and that's the thing that puts people in fear. And remember, it's fear to me is the absence of knowledge. Therefore, knowledge must be the absence of fear. So when you think about, you can put a lot of planning into this type of conflict. This is an ideological conflict. It truly is. We say in coin operations, counterinsurgency. Counterinsurgency is about the battle for hearts and minds of the people. We have to win hearts and minds, but we also have to have that physical deterrent in place, because the physical deterrent part is limited. There is military options, there is policing options and government options, but those options are measured and they're only part of the solution. The bigger part has to take place ideologically, through informing people. We have people coming from the Islamic faith and speaking to people even in the Far East and they work. You know, if we have radical preachers, they will be imprisoned, they will be sent abroad. I mean, you know, we've had this in every faith. It's not just in the Islamic faith, it's in the Christian faith. But we have people who are radical preachers and they can connect. They know how to connect to people. They can put the trigger words in, but they have to be challenged.
Did you read about, like, just to keep it local? Did you read? You know, there was a Regarda report or something there recently. I reckon that, I won't say it in the piece, like, but the Clonskee Mosque, you know, that there was Muslim Brotherhood in it, and there was about 70 people who were being watched. I won't say the Clonskee Mosque in it. But what I was saying is, have you heard, like, are there radicals in Ireland at the moment, and should we be worried? You know what I mean? That they're in this country, like. Well, the Gardaí said they're watching.
Yeah, so. I mean, let's have a look at Ireland geographically. Ireland has, I think, when I left Ireland a number of years ago, there was around 5 million people as the population of this island. Now we have 5 million people, but we have room for 50 million people. Now the thing is, that's a lot of places where you can hide out, and we're better than hiding. Ireland's a friendly country. We love a bit of music. We love this. We love that. But remember, we're a very parochial people. We're very an island nation. We know who's down the road and what's different and what's not. But the guards, in my knowledge, going back, and I'm going to speak in this in a limited way, I know going back quite a number of years, they have been doing a good job of watching people for a number of years. There are people here on the wanted list, or starting to wanted on a watch list. Now, the wanted list and the watch list are two different things. Watch list means you're watching because maybe they'll do something, maybe not. Or maybe because they have stuff that we need to find out more about. But a wanted list is different. With European arrest warrants, they'll be removed and put to the place where they need to go if they've committed a crime. But remember, as I said, the key to this is terrorism thrives in liberal democracy. The people who are wanting to communicate move to places, move across Europe. I mean, there's some parts of Europe now in this ideology where you can still get off one country, travel for 3 days across Europe, and no one will even ask you for a look at your passport. Again, you're looking for, you know, when you think, I mean, let's look at migration for a second, the amount of people. I think my last estimate looking today, there's 780,000 people at the moment trying to cross into Europe. Now, I live in southern Europe, and I know, and I've seen the heartbreak of what's washing up on the beaches of mothers and babies trying to have a life, trying to escape, and it's driving them from months through the desert to take that risk to get to Europe. And they're dropping people in boats, and they're putting them out into the sea, and they're told you'll be in Italy in 6 hours. That's what they're told. And they're drifting for 3 days, and they've only gone 4 or 5 hours side the coastline of the international waters of Libya. And they're drifting out there. Many of them don't make it. So something's driving them. And some people are coming through there with ulterior motives, through this transit point. Course, yeah. And it's sad because these people want a life. They want to come to Europe. They think Europe is the golden beacon on the hill. But the risks are coming with them. We can't deny that. So we have to have a control of that migration. But as long as we keep hammering the people, and we have to obviously keep in mind, we've got to keep it close, but it's a better balance. We can't be fear-mongering. People will come to you with information. They will come to you because they know they're going to do something, or wish to do something, or they're speaking in a way that's not the norm. And they will bring you this information. But I do know the guards have been doing a good job on this in Ireland.
I'd say if someone's on a watch list, anybody can't give it away. What exactly would the Gardaí, like, how do they go about it? Do they just, like, you know, how it's quite, I'd imagine it's quite difficult with the way, you know, people's human rights, as we were saying earlier on, people right to privacy, it's enshrined in the constitution in this country. So how, you know, with the Gardaí, I'd say it's quite curtailed how much they can watch them. I'd imagine, you know, I'd say it's pretty hard, like, you know what I mean? It's...
Well, I can't really, I don't want to talk about surveillance, but let me just point this out to you though. Let me tell you about the difficulties of long range and long term surveillance. If you look, for example, if you have one individual, man, woman or child, and it's important people to realise it's not just men, it's women and children. And if you have, say, 24 hours in a day, and you have 3 people, 8-hour shifts, 3 hours 24, and you have to follow these people everywhere, watch them, who they're speaking to, what they're about. Imagine the challenge that our forces have to put in place. So multiply that, that's 1 person, 3 people. Imagine that by the numbers of in the hundreds, or in the UK, thousands.
That's what I imagine.
It's huge.
And plus they have rights to privacy.
Absolutely. The logistical challenges, the human rights, the civil rights, all these factors on our privacies are all. So these are very interesting times. But the one thing I will tell you, Padraig, I've seen this, and I remember when I was very young, and even as a student, I remember looking when I was studying strategic warfare and insurgency and guerrilla warfare. I always had this in the back of my mind, looking at South American countries. For every left-wing type of social militant action, there's always a massive right-wing backlash. It's the worst type. It's like it's like the horseshoe. Both ends are here, but when they come back on each other, the backlash is huge. And we're seeing that play out now on a multitude of factors. But as technology increases, as our modes of communication and encryption comes, the challenges for our police forces and our security forces are huge. So we have to come up with more inventive ways.
And what would you, if you had, say there was someone came out a magic wand, say you were the head of Europol, and they said, right, Noel, you can have carte blanche to bring in any laws you want. I'm not saying like Trump travel ban and talking about, would you introduce internment of, suspects, or would you increase, time? What would you, if you could, just, a couple of things?
Well, I'm a kind of caught between two. I've always been a bit of a realist politically, but I'm also a bit of an idealist. The first thing I'm very much into people having their rights, because once we subjugate and devalue our own rights, we devalue our society. However, the first thing, this is my statement and my opinion only, the first thing I'd start looking at is the Schengen movement, the Schengen agreement. That's the one thing, freedom of movement, moving from country to country. So you have people accessing countries through the Schengen. You go to one country, you can enter into another without your passport being checked. Now I know that the armed forces and civil and security service across Europe have big issues with that. But money sometimes becomes more important than people's lives. So that's the first thing I do, is look at the Schengen arrangement. Ireland and Britain don't have a Schengen agreement. You still have to be passport checked. That's obviously because we have a history. And there's no point going around that. There's a history there, a long history, security implications. And that has served us well. But we do have to look at the Schengen in relation to other countries and people accessing. There is where the first point of contact needs to be looked at. And people say, oh, but freedom of movement is a cherished right. Yes, but we're not dealing with what we were dealing with 20 years ago. We're dealing with a new ideology, a new mode of transportation.
One of the London attackers had lived in Dublin, wasn't he?
There you go.
In July, wasn't it? June?
Yeah. And I see this play out across Europe.
He had an Irish passport, did he?
Apparently so. I see this play out across Europe many times, where people can just access countries and they're not getting checked.
Because then it didn't end as well. Yeah, he had married, I think, wasn't it, over here or something like that.
Yeah, and again, this is not just about people of the jihadi concept of Islamic faith or terrorism, the Islamic religion. This is across crime, all forms of crime, transportation, gun running, everything. You need to see how people are transporting logistically goods, tactics, equipment, and the worst form, I suppose, when you look at radical idealism and terrorists, it's not just their weapons or the guns, it's the people. They're the weapons. And they're manoeuvring around. I mean, I've seen evidence, and I know that even in the Barcelona attacks recently, I've seen the transcripts where you have people saying, we'll attack 7 cities at once, 7 small towns, the police will come. Now what's the goal? The goal is not to attack the police, to get the police in, so you can actually attack the police, because the police won't be prepared. You see, so that element tells me straight away, when you look at this politically and tactically and technically and strategically, the organisation of resources, the goal of any good insurgent is to undermine the status quo of a society. So by attacking the guardians of our society, the police, the military, the government, what's that actually telling us? Are we dealing with an insurrection? So just to recap here on our interview here with Padraig, we just finished off with saying that we can't depend on anybody for our security. We have to protect ourselves, we have to look after our own families, our interests, and the guardians of our society, we have to assist them in protecting us. And but again, fundamentally, we should never trust anybody for our own safety, and that's the one important message. The police, the armed forces, they generally know what to do in these type of situations. So our new my new guiding principle is to try and reach the public and say this is what you should do if you find yourself caught up in a terrorist attack, before, during and after, and that's what I'm going to be doing now. So thank you very much for joining us on this.
Cheers, Noel. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Padraig. Thank you very much.